The wine glass shattered against the marble floor before anyone could stop it. Gregory Hale's hand had come down so hard on the dining table that the crystal beside his plate toppled, spraying red across the white tablecloth like a wound blooming open. 12 guests froze mid-conversation. Waiters standing along the wall of the Hale Mansion's east dining room stiffened, unsure whether to move forward or disappear into the walls entirely. "Say that again," Gregory said, his voice low and dangerous, eyes locked on the man sitting across from him. "Say it again, and this time, look me in the eye when you do." Ethan Cole did not flinch. He set down his fork slowly, deliberately, the way a man does when he refuses to let someone else dictate the rhythm of his own hands. "I said," Ethan repeated, calm as still water, "that money isn't the only thing that builds a life worth living. I think you know that too, somewhere under all this." A ripple of gasps moved down the table. Vanessa Hale, seated beside her husband, felt her stomach drop into her shoes. She reached for Ethan's hand under the table, but he didn't need the comfort. He never seemed to. "You," Gregory said, jabbing a finger across the table, "work with your hands for a living. You fix cars. You come from nothing. You drive a truck that's older than my youngest board member. And you sit at my table and lecture me about what builds a life." "Dad," Vanessa started. "No." Gregory's voice cracked like a whip. "I built an empire from a garage with $400 and a dream nobody believed in. I know exactly what it costs to build something real. And I look at you," he said, staring down Ethan with contempt sharpened over 2 long years. "And I see a man who married into my daughter's life because it was easier than building his own." The room went silent except for the soft, nervous clink of a waiter setting down a serving dish too quickly. Ethan finally looked up. His eyes weren't angry. They were something worse, pity, wrapped in patience. "You don't know anything about me," he said quietly. "You've never asked." "I don't need to ask," Gregory snapped. "I can see it. Every time you walk into this house in that same jacket. Every time you flinch at the price of the wine. Every time you sit there like you're grateful just to be in the room. You're a charity case, Ethan. My daughter's charity case." Diane Hale, Gregory's wife, set down her own glass with a sharp clink. "Gregory, that is enough." But it wasn't enough. Not for Gregory. 2 years of resentment had been building behind his ribs like pressure in a dam, and tonight it broke. "I offered him a position at Hale Industries a year ago," Gregory continued, turning to the rest of the table as if delivering a speech to shareholders instead of family. "Entry level, a courtesy, something to give him some dignity, some direction. You know what he said?" Gregory laughed, bitter and short. "He said no. Said he was happy where he was. Happy," Gregory repeated, like the word tasted rotten in his mouth. "Changing oil for $40 an hour, while my daughter could be married to someone who actually matched her." Vanessa stood so fast, her chair scraped hard against the floor. "Stop it. Stop it right now." "Vanessa, sit down," Gregory said. "No." Her voice shook, but she didn't back down. She never had. Not from her father, not from anyone. "You have spent 2 years trying to make Ethan feel small at every single dinner, every holiday, every event. And I have let it slide because I kept hoping you'd see what I see. But I'm done hoping." Gregory's jaw tightened. "What you see is a man hiding something. Nobody works a mechanic's job by choice when..." "When what?" Ethan cut in, standing now too, his voice steady but firm. "When there's supposedly easier money somewhere. I don't want easier money, Gregory. I never have. I wanted to build something with my own 2 hands and know it was mine." "Is that so hard for you to understand?" For a moment, just a flicker, something crossed Gregory's face. Not doubt, not yet. But something close to it, a small crack in the wall of certainty he'd built around his own judgment. Then it vanished. "Get out of my house," Gregory said quietly. "Both of you. Come back when you're ready to talk sense, Vanessa." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears, but her voice didn't waver. "This is my house too, Dad. I grew up here, and you just told the man I love that he doesn't belong in it." She grabbed her purse. "We're leaving, but not because you told us to, because I can't sit here and watch you humiliate him one more time." Ethan followed her out without another word, without defending himself, without raising his voice. He simply walked, spine straight, dignity intact, past the stunned faces of Gregory's business associates and old friends, out through the grand foyer and into the cool night air. In the car, Vanessa broke down the second the door shut. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. He had no right." "Hey," Ethan reached over, brushing a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Don't apologize for him. You didn't do anything wrong. He humiliated you again." "He's tried to humiliate me for 2 years," Ethan said, and there was something in his voice now, not anger, but a tired, quiet resolve. "It stopped working a long time ago." "How?" Vanessa asked, searching his face. "How does it not get to you?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, staring out the windshield at the manicured hedges lining the Hale Estate's driveway, lit gold under the security lights. "Because I know who I am," he finally said, "and I know who my mother raised me to be. Your father doesn't know the first thing about either of those things." Vanessa frowned. "What do you mean?" But Ethan just shook his head and started the car. "Not tonight. Tonight, let's just go home." 3 miles away, in a modest 2-bedroom house that Ethan had bought with cash years before he ever met Vanessa, his mother, Margaret Cole, sat alone at her kitchen table, reading glasses perched on her nose, a stack of financial reports spread out before her, reports that if anyone in Gregory Hale's social circle had glimpsed them, would have stopped their hearts on the spot. Margaret's phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Rough night. Tell you tomorrow. Love you, Mum." She set the phone down, sighed, and looked out the window into the dark. 2 years, she murmured to herself. "Let's see how much longer you can keep humiliating my son before the truth finds you first, Gregory." She turned back to the papers in front of her, an invitation, embossed in gold lettering, sitting at the top of the pile. The Hale Industries Legacy Gala. An entire evening built around a public apology to a woman named on that same invitation, only by her old professional alias, Emma Ashford. Margaret picked up the invitation, studied Gregory Hale's name printed at the bottom, and allowed herself the faintest, coldest smile. "Careful what you go looking for," she whispered. "You just might find it." The next morning, Gregory sat in his office on the top floor of Hale Tower, staring out at the city skyline, still simmering from the night before. His assistant Priya knocked twice before entering. "Sir, Preston Wade is here for the gala planning meeting." Gregory rubbed his temples. "Send him in." Preston Wade strolled in with the easy confidence of a man who had spent 30 years riding Gregory's coattails, though he would never have described it that way. He dropped into the chair across from Gregory's desk, tablet in hand. "You look like hell," Preston said cheerfully. "Let me guess. Ethan again?" "Don't start." "I'm just saying, Greg, for a man worth $11 billion, you sure do lose a lot of sleep over your son-in-law's truck payments." Gregory shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass. "Are we here to talk about the gala or not?" Preston held up his hands in surrender, still smirking. Fine, the gala." He tapped his tablet. "RSVPs are coming in strong. Press coverage is locked. Every major outlet wants footage of you finally making things right with Ashford after... What has it been now?" 19 years, Gregory said quietly. Something shifted in Preston's expression, quick, almost invisible, gone before it fully registered. "Right, 19 years, long time to carry something like that." "She saved this company," Gregory said, more to himself than to Preston. "Back when we were 3 months from bankruptcy, and every investor in this city had already written us off. She believed in something nobody else did, and I let her name get dragged through the mud to protect the deal, and I never had the courage to fix it." "You were protecting the company," Preston said carefully. "We both were. It was a different time." "That doesn't make it right." Gregory looked up, and for a rare moment the hard lines of his face softened into something almost like grief. "If I could find her, really find her, I'd get down on my knees in front of every camera in that ballroom and apologize for what I let happen to her." Preston's smile flickered again, thinner this time. "Well, let's hope somebody finally tracked her down then." He stood, gathering his tablet, careful to keep his voice light. "Wouldn't want you making a promise like that to an empty room." He left with you waiting for a response. Gregory didn't notice the way Preston's hand trembled slightly around the tablet as he walked out. He was too busy staring at the gala invitation on his desk, at the name printed beneath his own, a woman he hadn't seen in 19 years, a wrong he had never made right, and a truth about to walk through his front door, wearing a face he had spent 2 years dismissing as beneath him. If you're already hooked, drop a comment telling me where you think this story is headed, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Because what happens at that gala is about to change everything. Vanessa didn't sleep that night. She lay awake beside Ethan, staring at the ceiling, replaying her father's words over and over until they blurred into a single ugly refrain. Charity case, charity case, charity case. At 3 a.m, she finally gave up pretending and turned to face her husband, who she realized from his breathing hadn't been asleep either. Ethan. Yeah. Last night, in the car. You said I don't know the first thing about who you are. She propped herself up on one elbow. What did you mean? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, like a man choosing each word from a very small, very precious pile. I meant that my mother isn't who your father thinks she is. What does that mean? It means, Ethan said, sitting up slowly, that I never told you everything about my family because I wanted you to love me for exactly what you saw. Not for anything attached to my name. Not for anything my mother built before I was born. Vanessa's heart began to pound. Ethan, you're scaring me a little. What are you saying? He took her hand, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something like nervousness flicker across his face. My mother used to run one of the most respected private investment firms on the East Coast. She built it from nothing, the same way your father built his company. And then a group of men she trusted, men who wanted what she'd built without wanting to share credit for it, destroyed her reputation to protect themselves. She lost almost everything overnight. Not the money. The money she kept, but her name, her voice, her seat at the table. Vanessa sat frozen, trying to process what she was hearing. Wait, Ethan, are you telling me you're not... She stopped, shook her head like she could rearrange the words into something that made more sense. You've been driving a 15-year-old truck. You live paycheck to paycheck. I've seen your bank statements, Ethan. We filed taxes together. You've seen my accounts, Ethan said gently. The ones I built myself on purpose, working an honest job, living an honest life, because I wanted to know, really know, if I could build something real without my mother's name attached to it. I wanted to know if the people around me would love me even if I had nothing to offer, but myself. And your mother's money? Untouched, growing, sitting exactly where she left it 19 years ago, because she raised me to believe that a man's worth isn't measured by a number in an account. Vanessa pressed her hands to her face, breathing hard. 19 years, she whispered. Ethan, my father has been trying to find a woman for 19 years, a woman he wronged, someone who saved his company and then disappeared after a scandal that wasn't her fault. Ethan went very still. He's throwing an entire gala for her, Vanessa continued, her voice rising with dawning horror. He calls her Mayor Ashford, says it's the one thing he never made right. The silence that followed stretched so long and so heavy that Vanessa could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Ethan, she said slowly, what's your mother's real name? Ethan looked at his wife, and in his eyes she saw not fear, but something like relief. The exhausted relief of a man finally setting down a weight he'd carried alone for far too long. Margaret Ashford Cole, he said quietly. Ashford was her maiden name, the name she used in business, before she buried it and became just Margaret Cole, my mother, and nothing more. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. I didn't know until 3 years ago, Ethan admitted. She didn't tell me the whole story until I brought you home for the first time and she recognized your last name. She made me promise not to say anything. She said she wasn't ready. That some wounds take longer than others to stop bleeding. And your father's gala, Vanessa whispered. It's for her. It's for her, Ethan confirmed. And your father has no idea that the woman he spent 2 years humiliating, the woman he's called a charity case's mother, the woman he's dismissed as beneath his daughter's marriage, is the same woman he's about to beg forgiveness from in front of the entire city. Vanessa fell back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling in stunned silence. He's going to lose his mind. Maybe, Ethan said. Or maybe it's exactly what he needs to finally see clearly. The following weeks blurred together in a strange, tense rhythm. Gregory, unaware of the storm quietly gathering just beyond his sight, threw himself into gala preparations with an intensity that unnerved even his closest staff. He rehearsed his apology speech in the mirror each morning. He commissioned a portrait of Ashford based on old grainy photographs to unveil at the event. He spoke about her. She had more integrity in her little finger than most men I've done business with in 30 years. Gregory told Diane one evening, loosening his tie after another long day of preparations. If I could go back and do one thing differently in my life, it would be standing up for her when it mattered. Diane watched him carefully from across the room, arms folded. You know, she said, it's interesting to me that you can hold a woman you wronged decades ago in such high regard, and yet you can't extend an ounce of that grace to Ethan, who has never wronged you at all. Gregory waved a hand. That's different, Diane. Is it? She pressed. You judge Ethan by his truck, and his job, and his jacket. You never once asked him a real question about who he is or where he comes from. You decided who he was the moment you learned what he did for a living. I built an empire from nothing, Gregory said, agitation creeping into his voice. I know the difference between someone who's willing to work for something and someone who's content coasting. Do you? Diane's voice was quiet, but it cut deep. Because from where I'm sitting, you've spent 2 years assuming the worst about a man our daughter loves without ever once giving him the benefit of the doubt. You're so eager to give a stranger from 19 years ago. Gregory didn't respond. He turned back to the window, jaw tight, unwilling to admit, even to himself, that the words had landed somewhere tender. Across town, tension of a different kind was building in Preston Wade's penthouse. He paced his living room, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and urgent. He's not going to stop looking, Marcus. You know Gregory. Once he sets his mind on something, he doesn't let go. If Ashford services, if she actually walks into that gala, everything we buried 19 years ago comes back up with her. The voice on the other end said something Preston didn't like. His face went pale. No, Preston snapped. We are not doing damage control after the fact. We stop this before it happens. I don't care what it costs. He paused, listening. I don't know where she is. Nobody's known where she is for 19 years. That's the whole point, Marcus. She disappeared. If she's resurfacing now after all this time, it's because she's ready to talk. And if she's ready to talk, Gregory isn't the only one who should be worried. He hung up, breathing hard, and stared out at the city lights, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. Because Preston Wade knew something Gregory didn't. He knew that the scandal that destroyed Margaret Ashford's career wasn't an accident, wasn't a misunderstanding, wasn't simply a case of bad timing and bad luck. It had been engineered, carefully, deliberately, and Preston had been the one holding the match. Back at Ethan and Vanessa's home, Margaret sat across from her son and daughter-in-law at the small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. I don't know if I'm ready, she admitted quietly. 19 years, and I still feel my chest tighten just thinking about walking back into a room full of people who watched me lose everything and said nothing. You don't have to go, Ethan said gently. Nobody's forcing you. No, Margaret said, straightening in her chair, something steely settling into her expression. No, I think I do have to go, not for Gregory, not even for closure, exactly. She looked at Vanessa. For you? Because you're carrying my son's name now, and you deserve to walk into your father's house without watching him tear apart the people you love. Because he's decided, without knowing anything real, that they're not good enough. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. Margaret, I had no idea. All this time I thought... You thought what everyone was meant to think, Margaret said, reaching across the table to take her hand. That's all right, dear. That was rather the point. What are you going to do? Ethan asked. Margaret's gaze drifted toward the window, toward the city lights glittering faintly in the distance, toward Hale Tower standing tall and arrogant against the night sky. I'm going to accept the invitation, she said softly, and I'm going to walk into that gala on the arm of my son, and I'm going to watch Gregory Hale's face when he finally understands exactly who he's been humiliating for the last 2 years. She took a slow sip of her cold tea, and for the first time in 19 years, something like resolve, sharp, quiet, unshakable, settled into her eyes. "It's time," she said. "Past time." If this story already has your heart racing, imagine what happens when she actually walks through those doors. Smash that like button, drop a comment with your prediction, and subscribe so you're there the moment Gregory's whole world comes crashing down. The days leading up to the gala moved like a slow tightening of a wire. Gregory barely slept. He rehearsed his speech in front of the mirror until the words felt worn smooth like river stones. He fussed over the seating chart, the lighting, the exact placement of the portrait he'd commissioned. A woman's face rendered in oil paint from photographs 2 decades old, her eyes sharp and knowing even in still colour. "Sir, the caterers need final numbers by tomorrow morning," Priya said, following him down the hallway of Hale Tower with a tablet in hand. "Fine. Whatever the last count was, add 10, Gregory said, distracted, "in case she brings someone. You still don't know if she's coming." Gregory stopped walking. "She's coming," he said, more to himself than to Priya. "I can feel it. 19 years and I finally have a shot at making this right. She has to come." Priya hesitated, then asked the question everyone around Gregory had been too afraid to ask directly. "Sir, if she does come, what exactly are you going to say to her?" Gregory was quiet for a long moment, staring down the long marble corridor as if it held the answer. "I'm going to tell her I was a coward," he said finally, "that I let ambition and self-preservation cost her everything, and that not a single day has passed in 19 years where I haven't thought about the version of myself who could have stood up and didn't." Priya said nothing. She'd never heard Gregory speak with that kind of raw honesty about anyone, least of all himself. At home, Vanessa found her father's transformation almost unbearable to watch. The tenderness he poured into preparing for a stranger's redemption stood in such stark, painful contrast to the contempt he still carried for Ethan that she found herself alternating between hope and fury, depending on the hour. "He asked me today if I thought Ashford would forgive him," Vanessa told Ethan one night, curled on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "He looked so unsure of himself. I've never seen my father unsure of anything in my entire life." "Grief does that," Ethan said. "Guilt does that." "He deserves to feel guilty," Vanessa said, an edge creeping into her voice. "But it makes me so angry, Ethan. He can extend all this grace, all this humility, all this hope toward a woman he wronged decades ago, and he can't manage a single ounce of it for you, who's done nothing but love his daughter." Ethan reached over, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "In 3 days, he's going to understand exactly what he's been doing," he said quietly. "Let him have his blindness a little while longer. It's about to cost him more than he knows." Vanessa searched his face. "Are you scared? For your mum, I mean. Walking back into all that?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "Terrified," he admitted. "She built a wall around herself 19 years ago and never fully took it down. I don't know what it's going to do to her standing in that room again. But I know she wouldn't be doing this unless she'd already made peace with whatever happens next." "And you?" Vanessa asked. "What do you want to happen?" Ethan considered the question carefully. "I want my mother to finally get to stand in front of the man who let her fall and watch him understand completely and irreversibly exactly what he threw away. Not just her investment, not just her name." His jaw tightened. "Her dignity." The morning of the gala, Preston Wade sat in his car outside Hale Tower, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He hadn't slept in 2 days. Every scenario he ran through his mind ended the same way, with his name dragged into the same wreckage he'd once let bury someone else. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You should have told him the truth 19 years ago. Tonight I will." Preston's blood ran cold. He stared at the message, rating it 3, 4, 5 times before deleting it with shaking hands, as though that alone might undo what was coming. He thought about calling Gregory, warning him, confessing everything before the room full of cameras and reporters could do it for him. He thought about it for almost 20 minutes. Then he started the car and drove to the gala anyway, because some men, even facing the end of everything they've built, cannot resist watching the fire instead of putting it out. By evening, the Hale Grand Ballroom glittered under crystal chandeliers, transformed into a cathedral of wealth and reputation. Round tables draped in ivory linen stretched across the floor. A string quartet played softly near the entrance. Waitstaff moved between clusters of the city's most powerful people, executives, politicians, philanthropists, journalists, with cameras angled toward the room's grand double doors. At the front of the ballroom stood the portrait Gregory had commissioned, veiled beneath dark fabric, waiting to be revealed alongside his apology. Vanessa arrived early with Ethan, both dressed formally, both quietly bracing for what was about to unfold. Gregory found them near the bar, and for once there was no venom in his greeting, only nervous energy radiating off him like heat. "You came," he said to Ethan, almost surprised. "Vanessa wanted to be here for you tonight," Ethan said evenly. "So did I." Gregory studied him for a moment longer than usual, something unreadable passing behind his eyes, before he simply nodded and moved on to greet another cluster of guests. "He's nervous," Vanessa murmured. "He should be," Ethan replied quietly. At exactly 8 o'clock, the orchestra shifted into something slower, more solemn, and Gregory made his way to the small stage at the front of the ballroom. The room settled into an expectant hush. Cameras rose, phones lifted, every conversation dimmed to silence. Gregory adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and looked out over the sea of faces that had gathered, some out of respect, some out of curiosity, some simply because a Hale Industries gala was the place to be seen. 19 years ago, Gregory began, his voice steadier than he felt. "I made a mistake that has haunted me every single day since. A woman believed in something nobody else did, believed in me, when this company was 3 months from bankruptcy and every door in this city had already closed. She invested not just her money, but her reputation, her name, her trust." He paused, gripping the podium. "And when a scandal threatened to unravel the deal that saved us all, I let her take the fall instead of standing beside her. I told myself it was business, I told myself there was no other way. But the truth is simpler and uglier than that. I was afraid, and I let a woman who deserved better disappear from public life to protect my own name." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Preston Wade, standing near the back, felt sweat gathering at his collar. "Tonight," Gregory continued, "I don't know if she'll come. I've spent years trying to find her, to apologize properly, to give her back even a fraction of what I let her lose. But whether she's in this room or not, I wanted every person here to know her name, and to know what I owe her." He turned toward the veiled portrait beside the stage. "Her name is Ashford, and she saved this company when I didn't deserve saving." He reached for the cord to unveil the portrait, and that was the exact moment the grand doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. A hush fell so complete that the string quartet faltered mid-note. Every head turned, and there, framed in the doorway, stood a woman in an elegant, deep emerald gown. Silver hair swept back, chin lifted with the unmistakable bearing of someone who had once commanded boardrooms and had never truly forgotten how. Margaret Cole walked into the Hale Grand Ballroom on the arm of her son. Gregory's hand froze on the cord. His eyes moved from the woman's face to Ethan standing beside her, then back again, and something in his chest seized as a recognition crashed over him like a wave he never saw coming. "No," he whispered into the microphone, the word amplified across the stunned silence of the ballroom. "No, that's—" His knees buckled. Gasps erupted as Gregory Hale collapsed against the podium, the microphone shrieking with feedback as it clattered to the floor, his body crumpling before anyone could reach him. Vanessa screamed his name and rushed forward. Diane dropped her champagne glass shattering against marble as she ran. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing the exact moment the billionaire's carefully constructed evening dissolved into chaos. And in the doorway, Margaret Cole stood perfectly still, watching the man who had ruined her life 19 years ago collapse at the sight of her, while beside her, Ethan finally exhaled the breath he'd been holding for 2 long, exhausting years. We're just getting to the moment everyone's been waiting for, so if your heart is racing right now, hit like, drop a comment, telling me what you think Gregory says when he wakes up, and subscribe, because the truth is about to come out, and it changes absolutely everything. The ballroom dissolved into chaos. Someone screamed for a doctor. Chairs scraped violently against marble as guests surged toward the stage, some out of concern, most simply hungry for a closer look at the spectacle unfolding in real time. Camera flashes strobed across the room like lightning. A reporter near the back was already whispering urgently into her phone, feeding the moment live to an editor somewhere across the city. Vanessa reached her father first, dropping to her knees beside him on the hardwood stage, her hands hovering over his chest, terrified to touch him and terrified not to. Dad, can you hear me? Somebody call an ambulance." "Already on the way," Diane said, phone pressed to her ear, her voice trembling but controlled. The voice of a woman who had spent 30 years learning how to hold herself together in front of a crowd, even when everything inside her was breaking. Gregory's eyes fluttered, unfocused, his breathing shallow and fast. His lips moved, forming a word that came out as barely more than a rasp. "Ashford." Margaret had crossed the room by then, Ethan half a step behind her, and she knelt beside Gregory with a composure that startled everyone watching. Not coldness, something steadier than that. The calm of a woman who had imagined this moment 10,000 times and had finally arrived at it. "I'm here, Gregory," she said quietly. "Breathe. Just breathe." His eyes found her face, and something in them cracked wide open. Recognition, grief, horror, disbelief, all colliding at once. "You're," he gasped. "You're Ethan's." "Yes," Margaret said simply. "I am." Gregory's eyes rolled back and his body went slack just as the paramedics burst through the ballroom doors, cutting through the crowd with a stretcher. The hospital waiting room smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. Vanessa sat with her knees pulled to her chest, Ethan's arm wrapped around her, Diane pacing a worn path across the tile floor. Margaret sat a few chairs down, hands folded in her lap, quiet and still, watching the family she had just upended with a mixture of guilt and resolve. She couldn't quite untangle. "You didn't do this to him," Ethan said softly, noticing the way his mother's eyes kept drifting toward the closed doors of the ICU. "His own choices did this." "I know," Margaret said. "That doesn't make it easier to watch." Diane stopped pacing and turned to face Margaret directly, for the first time since the ambulance ride. "I need to understand what happened," she said, voice tight but not unkind. "All of it. My husband has spent 19 years grieving a mistake he never fully explained to me. I deserve to know the truth." Margaret studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Sit down, Diane. It's a long story, and he's going to need us to understand it before he wakes up." Diane sat. 19 years ago, Margaret began, I ran an investment firm called Ashford Capital. Small by the standards of men like your husband, but respected. When Hale Industries was 3 months from collapse, every major investor in the city had already walked away. I didn't. "Why?" Diane asked. "Because I saw something in Gregory that reminded me of myself 20 years earlier," Margaret said, a faint, bitter smile touching her lips. Someone clawing their way up from nothing, terrified of being seen as small. I believed in the company. I believed, foolishly, that I understood the man running it. Vanessa leaned forward. "What happened?" "There were 2 other partners on the deal," Margaret continued. "Gregory and a man named Preston Wade." Ethan's head snapped up. "Preston was involved?" "Preston was the architect," Margaret said, her voice hardening. "When a regulatory issue threatened the deal, a minor compliance oversight that could have been resolved quietly, Preston manufactured evidence suggesting I had knowingly falsified investment disclosures to push the deal through. It wasn't true, not a single word of it, but it was convincing enough, and it gave Gregory a way out of a deal that suddenly looked politically dangerous to defend. And my father let it happen?" Vanessa said quietly, the words tasting like poison. "Your father," Margaret said, "stood in a boardroom and said nothing while I was accused of fraud in front of the very regulators who could have destroyed both companies. He let me become the story so his company could survive without scandal attached to his name. Preston built the lie. Gregory let it stand." The room fell silent except for the distant beeping of hospital machinery through the walls. "I lost everything that mattered," Margaret continued. "Not the money. I kept the money, because I'd built diversified enough that no scandal could touch my personal holdings. But my name, my credibility, every door in this industry closed to me overnight, and Gregory Hale never once picked up the phone to say he was sorry, let alone tell the truth." "So you disappeared," Ethan said softly, though he'd heard fragments of this story before. Never all of it laid bare like this. I disappeared, Margaret confirmed. I raised my son quietly, out of the public eye, and I told myself I didn't need vindication. That living well was enough. She looked at Ethan, eyes glistening. But watching Gregory tear you down these past 2 years, the same way Preston once tore me down, I realized I was wrong. Some wounds don't heal quietly. They need to be spoken aloud. Diane sat back, visibly shaken. 19 years, she whispered. I asked him about her so many times. He always said it was complicated. He never told me he was the one who stayed silent. He spent 19 years trying to make peace with a mistake he still doesn't fully understand, Margaret said. Tonight, he's going to have to. Gregory woke just after midnight, machines humming softly around him, and 4 taped to the back of his hand. Vanessa was asleep in the chair beside his bed, her head resting awkwardly against the wall. Diane sat closer, wide awake, watching him the moment his eyes opened. Gregory, she breathed, gripping his hand. You're awake. Thank God. He blinked slowly, disoriented, memory returning in fragments. The ballroom, the podium, the doorway, the face he never thought he'd see again. Margaret, he rasped. She's here, Diane said. She's been here all night. Gregory closed his eyes, and for the first time in longer than Diane could remember, his composure crumbled entirely. I need to see her, he whispered. I need to talk to her before I lose the courage. Diane hesitated only a moment before rising and stepping into the hallway. Margaret was sitting exactly where she'd been for hours, hands folded, waiting with the patience of a woman who had waited 19 years already and could survive a few minutes more. He's asking for you, Diane said quietly. Margaret rose, smoothed her gown, and walked into the hospital room alone. Gregory watched her cross the room, his throat tightening painfully. Margaret, he said, voice breaking on her name. I thought you were gone. I searched for you for years and I wasn't gone, Margaret said, standing at the foot of his bed. I was simply done being visible to people who couldn't be bothered to see me clearly the first time. Gregory flinched, the words landing exactly where she intended them to. I know what Preston did, he said. I've known for years, deep down, even when I told myself otherwise. I let it happen because standing up for you meant admitting the deal was compromised, and I was terrified of losing everything I'd built. And instead, Margaret said, voice steady despite the tremor beneath it, you let me lose everything I'd built to save what you'd built. Yes, Gregory admitted, tears finally slipping free. And I am so sorry, Margaret. Sorrier than I've ever been able to say out loud, because saying it meant admitting what kind of man I really was. Margaret studied him for a long moment, the anger she'd carried for 19 years, sitting uneasily beside a strange, unexpected softness. Do you know what the worst part was? She asked quietly. It wasn't losing the firm. It was watching every person who once respected me decide overnight that I must have deserved it. That's the part that never fully heals, Gregory. Not the loss, the judgment. Gregory's breath caught, and something behind his eyes shifted, a slow, painful dawning. Ethan, he whispered. Yes, Margaret said. Ethan, my son, whom you have called a charity case for 2 years, whom you offered a buyout to leave your daughter, as though love were a business transaction you could simply negotiate. You judged him exactly the way this city judged me, without asking a single real question, without extending an ounce of grace. Gregory pressed a shaking hand to his face. I didn't know. You didn't ask, Margaret said, not unkindly but firmly. That's the whole problem, Gregory. You've spent your entire life deciding who people are before you ever bother finding out. The room fell into heavy silence. I want to make this right, Gregory finally said. All of it. Your name, Ethan, everything I've broken. Margaret studied him for a long, searching moment. Then you're going to have more work ahead of you than one apology in a hospital bed, she said. But it's a start. Outside in the hallway, Vanessa had woken and stood frozen at the door, having heard every word. She turned to find Ethan watching her, his expression unreadable, and for the first time in 2 long, painful years, she saw something like hope settle across his face. The truth is finally out. But the real reckoning is just getting started. If you want to see Gregory make things right, smash the like button, tell me in the comments what his apology to Ethan should sound like, and subscribe so you don't miss the final chapter of this story. Gregory was discharged 2 days later with strict orders to rest, orders he had no intention of following. The moment he walked through the front doors of his estate, he asked Diane to gather Vanessa and Ethan for dinner that evening. Not the grand, performative dinners of before, but something smaller, quieter, more honest. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Diane asked, watching him ease into his study chair, still pale from the hospital. "I've never been less ready for anything in my life," Gregory admitted. "But I've spent 19 years avoiding a conversation I owed someone. I'm not spending another day avoiding the one I owe my own son-in-law." Diane crossed the room and kissed the top of his head. "Good," she said simply. "It's about time." Ethan arrived that evening braced for anything. Another lecture, another veiled insult, another test disguised as an olive branch. What he did not expect was to find Gregory standing in the foyer waiting for him, alone, without an audience, without a speech prepared for effect. "Ethan," Gregory said, and his voice carried none of its usual authority. It sounded, for the first time, like the voice of an old man who had finally run out of places to hide. "Thank you for coming." "Vanessa asked me to," Ethan said carefully. "I know." Gregory gestured toward the study. "Would you give me a few minutes? Just us. No audience this time." Ethan hesitated, then nodded, following him into the study where 2 glasses of scotch sat untouched on the desk, a habit Gregory had, offering a drink as though it were currency for difficult conversations. "I'm not going to insult you by pretending the last 2 years didn't happen," Gregory began, once the door was closed. "I called you a charity case. I offered you money to leave my daughter. I made you feel small in front of my friends, my colleagues, at my own dinner table, more times than I can count." He paused, jaw tightening. "And the entire time, I never once asked you a real question about who you actually were." Ethan said nothing, letting the silence stretch, unwilling to make this easy. "I spent 19 years mourning a woman I wronged," Gregory continued, "convincing myself I was a different man than the one who let that happen. And then I turned around and did the exact same thing to you, decided who you were based on a job and a jacket and a truck, and never once considered that maybe, just maybe, there was a man underneath all of it worth actually knowing." "There was," Ethan said quietly. "There still is." "I know that now." Gregory's voice cracked. "Your mother built something extraordinary, lost it because men like me were too cowardly to stand beside her. And instead of learning anything from that, I spent 2 years being exactly the kind of man who destroyed her. I judged you the way this city judged her, and I'm asking you," his voice broke fully now, "I am asking you to forgive me, even though I know I haven't earned it yet." Ethan studied him for a long moment, feeling the weight of 2 years crash down all at once, every dismissive comment, every humiliating dinner, every moment Vanessa had come home in tears because her father couldn't see past a paycheck to the man standing in front of him. "I don't need your money, Gregory," Ethan finally said. "I never did. I don't need your approval either, not really. I've built a life I'm proud of, with or without it. But Vanessa needs her father. And I think, somewhere in there, you need your daughter more than you've let yourself admit." "I do," Gregory said. "God, I do." "Then earn it," Ethan said simply. "Not with an apology and a study over scotch, neither of us is drinking. With time. With actually asking questions instead of assuming answers. With treating me like a person you're getting to know, instead of a problem you're trying to manage." Gregory nodded slowly, something like respect flickering across his face. Respect he probably should have extended 2 years earlier. "That's fair," he said. "That's more than fair." He extended his hand. Ethan looked at it for a long moment before finally taking it. "Welcome to the family," Gregory said quietly. For real this time. The reckoning for Preston Wade came 3 days later in a boardroom instead of a ballroom, though the audience was no smaller. The Hale Industries Board, legal counsel, and, seated quietly in the corner at Gregory's invitation, Margaret Cole herself. Preston had tried in the days following the gala to control the narrative, leaking a version of events to a friendly journalist that painted himself as an unwitting bystander to whatever had unravelled 19 years ago. It hadn't worked. Margaret, it turned out, had kept records, copies of internal memos, correspondence proving the fabricated compliance violation had originated from Preston's office, time-stamped and unmistakable, preserved for 19 years by a woman who never quite let herself believe she wouldn't need them one day. "You kept all of this?" Gregory asked her quietly, the morning before the board meeting, flipping through the folder she'd handed him. "I kept everything," Margaret said, "because some part of me always knew that someday the truth would need proof, not just a memory." In the boardroom, Preston sat rigid as the documents were laid out one by one, his easy charm evaporating with every page. "This is ancient history," he said, voice tight. "Nobody cares about a 19-year-old compliance dispute." "I care," Gregory said, standing at the head of the table, his voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "Because you didn't just manufacture a compliance violation, Preston. You destroyed a woman's career to protect a deal, and you let me carry the guilt of it alone for 19 years while you walked around this city collecting favors and shaking hands like none of it ever happened. You let it happen too," Preston snapped, desperation cracking through his composure. "You didn't stop me." "No," Gregory agreed. "I didn't. And that's a mistake I'll spend the rest of my life making, right? Starting today." He turned to legal counsel. "Prepare the termination and reach out to the regulatory board. Miss Ashford's record gets corrected publicly in full, regardless of what it costs this company in the process." Preston's face drained of colour. "Gregory? You had 19 years to come clean," Gregory said. "You chose silence every single time. That's not my burden to carry for you anymore." Preston was escorted out of Hale Tower that afternoon, his name quietly stripped from the letterhead by the end of the week, his reputation unravelling in the same press cycle that had once helped bury Margaret's. Margaret watched it happen from the corner of the boardroom without a trace of satisfaction on her face, only a long overdue exhale, the release of a breath she realised she'd been holding for 19 years. The following month, Hale Industries hosted a second event, smaller, quieter, no cameras this time except for a single company photographer documenting the moment for the corporate archive. In the same ballroom where Gregory had once collapsed at the sight of a woman's face, a new plaque was unveiled near the company's founding portrait. In recognition of Margaret Ashford Cole, whose belief in this company and whose strength in the face of injustice made everything that followed possible, Margaret stood before it with Ethan on one side and Vanessa on the other. Gregory, a respectful step behind them, no longer centre stage, no longer needing to be. "How does it feel?" Vanessa asked softly. Margaret considered the question for a long moment, studying the plaque, studying the family gathered around her, a family that, despite everything, had somehow found its way to something real. "It feels," she said finally, "like I can stop carrying it now." That evening, the Hale family gathered for dinner again. The same dining room, the same table, the same crystal glasses. But this time, when Gregory raised his glass, there was no contempt in his eyes, no judgment waiting behind his words. "To Ethan," he said, looking directly at his son-in-law, "who I judged before I ever really knew him and who taught me the hard way, that a man's worth was never something I had any right to measure. To Margaret," he continued, turning to her, "who deserved better 19 years ago and who I am grateful every single day finally got the chance to make right. And to family," he finished, voice thick, "the kind you're lucky enough to keep even after you almost lose it through your own foolishness." Glasses clinked. Vanessa reached for Ethan's hand under the table the same way she had the night everything nearly fell apart, except this time there was nothing to brace for. Only relief, only warmth, only the quiet, hard-won peace of a family that had finally learned to see each other clearly. Outside the window, the city lights glittered on, indifferent to the small, enormous transformation that had taken place inside that house, the kind of change that never makes headlines, but matters more than any gala ever could. And somewhere in that quiet moment, Gregory Hale finally understood what he had spent a lifetime chasing without knowing its name. Not power, not legacy, not even redemption, just the simple overdue grace of seeing the people in front of him for exactly who they were. If this story moved you, that's exactly why I tell them, so don't scroll away just yet. Hit like, drop a comment telling me which moment hit you hardest, and subscribe so you're here for the next story, because there's always another family, another truth, another reckoning waiting to be told.